we'll get started.
Okay.
And just grab our questions here. Increase them so I don't need to wear glasses. Just nice. Okay. Just a couple things kind of just before we get into questions and stuff. Just thanks for everybody. Welcome. And just a huge thank you for joining us. I know weekends are busy and I really appreciate all the reposts of this and just joining us and giving up your time. So thank you. And then for you too, Norb, this is an awesome opportunity for me. We've known each other a long time on X, but it's kind of cool to be able to chat like this. So thanks for that and for always being so supportive. Just a few things to keep in mind. I know that some people have said that they would love to ask some questions. I'll save that till the end, just because then I think I'd be able to handle requests for speakers and stuff a little bit easier. So maybe the last 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to open it up for anybody who wants to ask questions. We'll do that. So maybe, let's say the 45, 50-minute mark. We're going to try to keep it to an hour. I know we'll probably go a little bit over, but it just makes for a better edit when the final MP4 is not really long. If anyone is requesting to speak when you do have your mic, if you can mute in between so that just one person's mic is open, it avoids that feedback, that awesome screechy sound. So we can do away with that. Exactly. It's pretty wild sometimes. Something else too is we kind of planned, Norb and I talked about this. If some poetry is going to be shared, which I'm really hoping it will be, the language could be a tad, how should we say, raw. So if you have wee ones in the room with you, you might want to not listen to this live, maybe listen to the edited recording later. That's probably the best. Is that good advice, you think?
I went through and cleaned it up a little.
Yeah, you didn't have to do that. Even I tell my grade 12s don't edit other people's work. So it's all good. It's all good. I think the last thing is just please consider supporting Norb's work. So I've shared some links. He'll share some links. It's always just really nice, even if, you know, it's something like you've got a Kindle Unlimited subscription or something. I don't know if you're on KU, Norb, but something like that, you know, in whatever way possible, even just sharing, right? Share it to increase the ability for people to find it. So let's kick this off. And how about we start with just a brief intro bio or something that you want to tell us to kind of warm things up a bit?
Okay, yeah. Obviously, my name's Norb. I live in Cortland, New York, which is just south of Syracuse, kind of buried in the middle of the state. But I'm originally from Buffalo, which is not far at all from the Canadian border. I know I've joked around with Jen probably, and definitely Joanne, who's listening, that because I'm born in Buffalo, I'm basically part Canadian anyway. That's just how it is. We're so close to the border that there's a lot of little overlap, like, you know, trips to Niagara Falls were normal. You know, whereas for other people, it's like a vacation destination. For us, it was like, hey, let's spend the day in Niagara Falls. Why not? But yeah, I write poetry. We're talking about my third book, which is called World by Design. It is self-published after a couple of years spent querying different indie publishers. You reach a limit and you're just like, all right, put it out. So I did. And I think that's about as brief a bio as I can get myself into.
That's awesome. Thank you. I'm gonna put you on the spot and give you some questions we didn't talk about. Is that cool?
Oh, sweet.
These are going to be rapid fire questions. Let's do a few of these just to get a feel for the vibe here. What's your favorite burger joint? And is it uniquely American, or would we have one here?
I am not a fan of burgers, period. But if I ever get the craving for one, it's Burger King. I don't know if you guys have Burger King.
We
probably
do.
have McDonald's, but
Yeah, no, we have Burger King. That's pretty standard. We don't have as many chains. There's usually one per city or something, but yeah, we have that.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of places, Burger King is like on every other block across from the McDonald's. But yeah, I prefer Burger King hands down over McDonald's. Fancy burgers don't do much for me. I would rather have a burrito.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, so we have that in common. What's your favorite 90s band, singer or band?
90s band. I'm going to play to the crowd and say Tragically Hip.
Nice.
and you know, Gord Downey was an inspiration. Obviously, you don't need me to tell you about him or talk about his legacy or anything. But it took me a while to get into the hip. I didn't get into the hip until like the late 90s, I guess. Even though I'd always kind of listened to him. Like, we got 102.1 FM out of Toronto. We got that radio station. It came in great in cars. And obviously they played a lot of hip. But I'm also a big Radiohead fan. Pearl Jam, Beastie Boys, obviously. Public Enemy, 90s era hip hop, especially. That era of hip hop was very instrumental in me doing what I do now.
That was going to be kind of my segue, is how was it music that kind of got you into writing poetry? Did you always sort of dabble in poetry and just didn't write the amount that you needed to publish? Like, so what was the start of that whole journey into poetry?
Oh, easily when I was in high school, early 90s. You know, everybody writes teenage poetry at some point. I think everybody who likes poetry dabbles in it, or dabbled in it when they were teenagers. I took a specific interest in it. You know, you'd go walk into English class and the teacher would be like, okay, we're doing poetry this week, and everybody groans, and I'm kind of there with my head down going, yeah, sweet. And I had teachers that were very supportive. They would take the time out of their schedule to read things that I wrote outside of class. And, you know, some of it was okay. Some of it was very not okay, because you're young and you're going through all these different things. And I think for me, writing was a way of sort of figuring out what I was going through.
Would you say that's still true now? You mentioned like teens and the attraction of poetry and stuff. Do you still feel like you write it now to just process life? Is that one of the reasons why you do what you do?
Yeah, I think so. And, you know, it's cliche, but there's no owner's manual for life. There's no instructions or directions. You know, you're just sort of, you're thrown into this world and expected to know what to do. And some people can manage it one way or another way. I chose poetry because, yes, I can think on my feet, but it takes me time to process what I'm seeing, what I'm going through, in order to sort of understand, you know, what I did right, what I did wrong, what I like, what I don't like, what I accept and what I don't accept. And then it's a way for me to get the conversations in my head out, to see it on paper and say, okay, this worked for you, this didn't work for you. Now let's go in this direction or that direction. It's sort of like it's my own little way of figuring things out along the way. You know, people make mistakes, and I don't think we're all often given the grace to accept that we're human. And poetry for me is my way of saying, hey, I'm a human being. This is what I've gone through. This is how I've seen it from my perspective. It's a way of kind of explaining myself after the fact, which take that as you will.
It's kind of interesting because the more people that I get to know, especially on X and our writing community, we all have just exactly the stuff that you described. Life is really hard. There's so much to process. So many things happen that are overwhelming, and you react to it in the moment, but then later it might be festering, and you kind of you need that extra time to figure it out. And writing, a lot of people describe that that's their way of whatever type of writing that is, whether it's poetry or prose or whatever. But it's like we need that as our outlet. It's very specific to authors, that we use it for that. But it's universal, these things that you're describing. And yet sometimes there's this stigma to talk about it or to describe it. But, what's the reaction been to your poetry? Do you feel like it's been really positive, even though sometimes the stuff that you're writing isn't necessarily sunshine and rainbows? Is it, have you had a good reaction? Do you feel that it's been supported?
Absolutely. I feel like I've gotten a lot of support, a lot of positive messages, a lot of, hey, I've been through that, and I'm glad you talked about that, or thanks for bringing this up, or, I appreciate it, because you show people, you're almost kind of, not only are you holding up a mirror to yourself, but you're holding up a mirror to them too, where they can kind of see it. And your words sort of become a soundtrack to relating to what they've been through, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, they can find themselves in your lines or your even your titles. Did you feel that with each of the 3 books, is there like a common theme, or do they all represent a specific time in your life? How did you kind of organize that part when you decided to publish?
They're chronological. They start the day I write, they end the day I finish. There's not really much organizing per se. I don't do a whole lot of editing or going back, and I prefer to keep what I wrote in the moment just like that. I don't want to go back and change what I wrote yesterday because I feel differently today, and how I feel today, I don't want that to change what I was feeling yesterday.
I like that. It's more authentic that way, because you might go back and second guess, oh, is this poem too dark, or what, and maybe focus too much on how it will be received versus just being really authentic and saying, this is how I felt at the time, and I need to get it out. And then being really brave to share that. I admire poets so much. I feel like I can hide a little bit more. Well, maybe I didn't do that with my first book, but I can hide a little bit more in the stories I tell, and I can insert pieces of real life, but it's not necessarily, described to be my real life. But with poems, there's this raw element to it that is so vulnerable and so personal, and kudos, that you've done that 3 times. And I just think that there's something really commendable about poets. How do you deal with that? The fact that, like you said, it's chronological. This could be stuff you've experienced. Do you ever feel like you're saying too much or putting too much of yourself out there, or have you gotten really confident with that?
It's how do I explain this? I tend to road test a lot of my work first. I've been a member of a website called writing.com for almost 25 years now, which in internet time is like forever. So that's where my writing shows up first. And I get feedback from there. as far as, I'm sorry, what was the other part of the question? I had something I was going to add to it, and I can't remember now.
I think that's so cool. So you do have, while you said you don't edit, you actually have sort of a sounding board, like a place where you can say, hey, this is what I'm working on, or this is a poem I wrote yesterday. What do you think? So in some ways that would help, right? That editing process is maybe not on the page, but you could still get feedback. Have you ever had anyone say in that group, don't publish this? Like, have you had anybody warn you that this is too much, too raw, too, too, I don't know, political or something, or edgy?
No, I mean, I've had feedback that, well, I disagree with what you say, but it's your right to say it. That kind of feedback. Most of it's been very supportive. If there's ever been any pushback, it's been, well, I wouldn't have said it like this, or, maybe you could have said this instead of that. Well, and that's great, and I appreciate that, but I said what I said. Not to be a jerk about it, but I said what I said.
It's like people don't have to read it either. So there's that choice. You have the choice to put it out there. They have the choice to not read it. So that sounds fair. It's definitely, once you publish something, people, maybe they read the look inside or whatever. They don't have to buy it. They don't have to read the whole book. So you're giving them that choice.
Yeah. And, one of my favorite sayings is one man's ceiling is another man's floor. People can say, oh, I don't like it because it's too edgy. Well,
I'm not sure if it's just edgy on my end, but you can up a little bit there, Norb.
I'm sorry?
You were just breaking up a little bit there. I'm not sure if it was just on my end or not, but yeah, if you want to repeat that.
I'm sorry. I'm trying not to. But yeah, one man's ceiling is another man's floor. What you find to be too edgy might not be edgy enough, or not political enough, or too political. So a lot of it's very subjective. You
would have made a good teacher. Sounds like a speech I would make in class. That's awesome. Did you ever consider doing anything like that?
I thought about it, but my first love has always been writing. And when I decided I wanted to go to college, I wanted to go for journalism and communications. I was an avid newspaper reader. I read it every day, cover to cover. I had an internship at a newspaper, a local community weekly newspaper that let me write some articles when I was in high school. That was the career path I wanted to go down until I went to college and realized that it wasn't high school, and it wasn't my study habits and my preparation and the way I got through high school wasn't going to get me through college while trying to also hold down a full-time job. So it became, car or job kind of thing. And long story short, that's why I'm here.
Yeah, it sounds like life happened. That's right, the reality. Yeah. That's so cool just to hear your love of journalism. I think that's really neat. There's so many, I can see now why some of the relationships, like why you and Joe would hit it off, and just some of the other people on here who are really passionate about that. That's cool. How do you know when you're done a book or a poem? Like, how do you know when you're ready to publish? Do you make sure that it has a certain number of poems per book, or is it like a year you give it, or like how long? Do you do that? When do you know that it's time?
It's really by feel. It sounds kind of simple and kind of stupid, but it all depends on the notebook itself. The actual physical notebook, once that is full or just about full, when I feel like I've said everything that I've gotten to say, and this goes also back to whether there's a theme or a certain topic, and that usually sort of reveals itself. I'd say maybe anywhere between a third to a quarter of the way through, where I say, okay, the poems are starting to lean toward this direction or that direction. Let's see how long I can keep that going for. When the notebook gets pretty filled up and I feel like there's a good enough amount of content, then I say, okay, I'm ready. Let's format. Let's go through all of this again and make sure that it's really what I want to say, and it represents me in a way that I feel comfortable with it. The other part of it is I have to feel a certain sense of separation from the material. I wrote it. I know what it means. I know when it's an especially personal piece or an especially emotional piece. I know I need time away from it before I can really process myself, before I can detach myself from the work so that it can stand on its own. And I don't have to be self-conscious about putting it out there. I wouldn't publish a book if I were afraid of it. And I have to be okay with with knowing that other people are going to see this and what their reactions might be, to where I can defend it and say, well, this is what I meant and what I wrote and what I'm trying to say, or what I said. So there is a certain period of time, but it's not something I can actually put a number on. It's more based on feel.
Yeah, it's a feeling that you're ready. But I love how you didn't just link it to you were done the poems, but that you're ready to not only share it, but deal with whatever feedback might come. And that might not be immediate, right? That might be, I don't know what your process is there, but it could be, a few months or something even before you settle with it. Has it ever been that long where you finished it, you formatted it, you knew you were done, but you just weren't ready to put it out there and you waited, you held on to it? Like, what's the longest you've ever waited?
I think I went 2 years between the first two books and maybe 3 between I went 2 years between publishing the first book and the second book, even though both were finished by the time the first book was published. The second book was the second manuscript was already done. All I needed to do was get it in a Word document. But I waited because you don't want to put things out bang, bang, bang right away. You want to have time for people to read it, digest it, you personally to promote it, things like that. Between the second and third book, I had learned so much more about publishing, about self-publishing. I went through a much longer query process trying to get World by Design published by an actual publisher. So there was that. And then after doing that for so long, I got to the point where I was like, you know what, screw it. Let's just do it ourselves.
I can't believe that you're writing it all by hand. I did that, years ago, and then switched to typing everything. More just the time it would take, and but there is something really, really neat about brain to pen or whatever. That's just, I'm impressed that that's how you're still doing it, and you've got that notebook, and when it's done, it's time. You obviously then have to type them all up. Do you find that tedious? Is it pleasant? Like, what's that feel like for you since you're using the notebook?
It's a little tedious, but I prefer seeing the words come out of my hand I need to see them on the paper, because that's how I started. Even before I had a computer, even before there was internet, there was paper, and that's how I've always done it. I went through a brief phase where I just went straight to computer, and I didn't care for it. There's something different about scratching out words on a page versus just backspacing, because you can cross a word out, and write a new word next to it, but you see that idea, and when you go back to try to type it up, you can look at it and say, well, maybe that original word was the better word choice. That was the first thought, I guess. So that's one of the things that's unique in the editing process about typing from a handwritten page.
It almost seems more emotional too. Like it feels deeply personal in a way that the keyboard perhaps doesn't have that same feeling to it.
Yeah. It's like typing a message on a computer. You can't really see the emotion behind it. If you look at the notebooks, you can tell if you're in a hurry and you're writing a note to your daughters and you've got to go, your handwriting is different than just writing down a list of chores or writing happy birthday in a card. When your emotions are different, your handwriting is different. And that when I'm going back and typing it up, that can give me a clue as to the emotion that I might need to put into a piece should I have to go ahead and read it later.
I love that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. That's awesome. And a really neat way to kind of describe that connection. That's so cool. Does it influence your titles? Do you come up with the titles as you're writing the poem? Do you always pull lines from the poem to create a poem's title? How do you do that? What's that kind of look like for you?
It varies. I keep a smaller, thicker notebook. It's maybe like a 3x5 inch notebook, where if I'll have an idea but I'm not ready to sort of flesh it out, I'll just write the idea down. It might be a couple words or a couple lines, or I'll be doing something random during the day and something will pop into my head and I'll go, oh, that might make an interesting title if I can fit something around it. And when I'm ready to go back and write, I'll flip back through that notebook and say, yeah, this is what I'm ready to work on. This is what I've got going for it. And then if there's a title I already have for it, that's great. If not, maybe there's a steadier theme within the poem itself that I can pull out as a title. It just varies. It varies upon what I'm working on.
And World by Design, where did that title come from? Is it one of the poems? Is it sort of what you felt about the world at the time when you were writing the poems?
It's not. The theme of the book sort of became, are we creating the world we live in, or was the world created for us to live in? So World by Design sort of enveloped that whole part of the theme, where are we designing it? Was it designed? Where's that is there a balance between the two that we walk each day? I think it just kind of jumped out at me maybe while I was halfway through, or maybe a third of the way through writing it, where this sounds like a good way to sum up what the book is going to turn into, or what the book's going to be about.
I love it. We're jumping into like a whole existential concept here, I think, with this new one, and everyone kind of thinking about so much that's going on in the world. That question of, are we actually creating meaning in our lives, or is this somehow constructed and we're just living in this? It feels like that a lot lately, that doubt. So do you have a favorite poem from that book that you can share to give us a feeling for the kind of emotion behind it?
I was going to start with the first one, but I think I'm going to jump right to the last one.
Perfect.
Because it really does kind of sum everything up. It kind of ties everything into a knot. It's called What You Want It to Be. After all, what do we have to lose? We live limitless inside our limits, deceived into complacency and rich in what we think enriches us. We're not wrong, but we're also very wrong in playing along in groups and societies that try to angle our functions to their needs. And you know, and I know, we don't need those needs. Pack it in and unpack. Keep only what you can carry. None of us is long for this world, even more if we continue longing. It wasn't built for us, and what exactly are we trying to build if not the same things? The end is only the means to more endings, and the beginning just leads to more questions we're yet to see. Me, I'm right here, but I'm not going anywhere.
I love this, Norb. I'm going to be definitely reading this. We're not going to chat a lot about 100, but when I read that and reviewed it, it was just like when you just read this poem now. I can relate. It feels so musical to me. Your writing it's like lyrics or a conversation, both, right? There's a musicality, but it also feels like you're talking on the page. And I don't know, it really resonates with me. When other people speak at the end, they can maybe talk about their connection to the words in the poem, but that's beautiful and relatable. Did you finish it off because it's kind of getting us to think about it? Why did you choose that one last, or was it just because it was chronological?
It was chronological, but at the time, I think that felt like a really good stopping point as well. Like I said, I knew there was a lot of material already behind it, and I thought that, like I said, that's a really good place to tie everything up, put a bow on it, and call it a day. That was it. That felt like, okay, this is done. I can't push this any further than where I am.
And it sounds like it was asking both yourself and us, the reader, a lot of questions that maybe there's no answers for yet. So maybe that'll be the next book, but it's kind of like we're going to ponder all of that along with you. And you almost have to have more time pass before you can probably even come back to some of those themes that you just read. So that's so cool. What do you think about topics that are off limits? Like, you obviously have a lot of really personal, existential topics. Do you delve into trauma at all? Do you figure some things just you don't want to share and you kind of leave that? Or is it just whatever you write that day and you just let it all kind of pour out, even if it's really, really hard or really sad? Or
that's a really good question. It really depends on what my mood is when I've set out to try to write. I don't try to write something specifically in a specific tone unless I'm feeling a certain way about something. As far as trauma, yeah, I've been through things, but I really, there are certain things that I'm more willing to talk about, that I'm more open to talking about, because I know they're common. I know that they're relatable. Grief is something that I think we've all experienced. We all experience it differently. It's okay to talk about it. It's okay to not talk about it. It's okay to get really personal about it. And it's also okay to sort of be a little not mysterious, but you don't have to be very, you can be generic about it, but still keep it personal. You don't have to go into detail as long as you're still being engaging.
That's such an amazing takeaway, because just the permission, sometimes people really think that they can't do certain things in writing, that it breaks rules, it's not allowed, it might offend someone, it might hurt somebody that you love because it's deeply personal and maybe includes a family member or something. And what my takeaway from what you just said is, sometimes the writing just it has to get onto the page, and it's okay. And it's also okay if you don't want to write about certain feelings. They're just not, you don't have no interest, or you're not ready, or for whatever reason, you don't have to. So I love that it's a new kind of perspective for me on that, that you don't have to feel shame if you have published something on that. Because I've spoken to so many people who they haven't written that book yet because they don't feel like they are allowed to. And I think that's kind of cool just to hear your take on that.
If you're not ready to write that book because you are afraid to, I think the only person you're holding it back from is yourself. I don't mean to sound condescending about it, or greedy or pompous, but a lot of times that's writing is the best way to deal with it and to put it out. Write it even if you're not going to publish it. Write it for yourself, for your own sake, for your own good, because I think it gives you a way to process what you're feeling. If you're holding it back, I think is what I'm trying to say, and that's fine. But when you keep going over that in your head, at some point you're not going to do it. You're really going to do it, or you're not going to do it. And what you're really doing is talking yourself out of doing it. And I just think you're doing your own self a disservice by doing that. You're not. I know everybody is allowed to do whatever they want and grieve the way they want, but it's sad to see people hold themselves back because they think they have to follow a certain set of guidelines or rules. The first rule of writing to me is there are no rules. You're in charge.
I love this. That's so empowering. Just really empowering. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. I just added a couple people who had a request to speak. I think now would be a really nice time if, Christina, you had requested first. Do you have a question for Norb or a comment that you'd like to make? Kind of open it up to you for a minute there.
Yeah, let's go.
Might be a delay.
On, Christina, you know how this works.
I was going to say there might be a delay.
Okay, yeah, my mic was off.
Beautiful.
Yeah, okay, so guys, sure. So I was writing comments the whole time. And one of the fascinating things that I was really thinking about a lot is what Norb was saying about editing and how he is keeping the experience from today and holding on to that when he's doing his editing another day. And yet there's the opposite, right? There's that part where, okay, I need to have some distance from my work so I can edit it. So what is the balance for you with your poetry? I mean, what kind of edits do you end up making after all?
Well, the difference to me is in having the time away from it, to detach myself from it. That's in order to share it. As far as editing, like I said, I don't do very much editing. I tend to write a couple pieces at a time, and then I'll type them up and go from there. It's I don't like to do one at a time. I like to do them kind of in bunches. That way I'm not overwhelmed or jumping between mediums all the time. I can spend a few days or a few weeks writing, and then I can take a day or two and type them up. And that's fine. It's the whole detachment process that happens between when the book is typed up and when I'm ready to publish it.
That's very cool, Norb. Yeah, I think that we all have a different process, but certainly whether it's editing or you just like you need to sit with it, whatever the reason, there is a bit of a time between the two. And it's so personal to decide on what that looks like, right? I have kind of a weird question. Do you ever, I mean, it sounds very much like the poems are personal, whatever's going on in the world, whatever's going on with you. Have you ever tried to write kind of just a real, hey, this poem's going to be a fantasy, or this is going to be kind of a weird sci-fi? Have you ever written a poem where it's completely fictional, or is it always nonfiction?
That's a good question. I would say there are a handful probably in each book that they're not fiction, but they're not fiction. There's sort of a kind of the names and places have changed to protect the innocent or whatever. A few here and there that sort of veer a little away from an actual situation, or that are a little looser with the details, I guess. That, yeah, this isn't really real, but it's sort of based loosely around something that's real. I tend to be a lot more introspective. I find it hard to write things that aren't true. Okay. And let's put it this way. I've tried to, I like to be funny. I like to tell jokes and have a good time and make people laugh. And I've tried to write funny poetry. I've tried to write what I've seen people call spam poetry, where it's like satirical, based off of different things. And that's hard. That's really hard for me to write humor or to write satire, even though that's a lot of what I enjoy to read. To put that into poetry for me is very, very difficult. Because it doesn't flow naturally out of me the way a more personal piece might.
I find that so interesting because on X, like you said, you're very funny and humorous. And so certainly that's a side of you, but I find that just so interesting how complex writing is, that just because you have, you're a witty person or you like to read stuff that makes you laugh, it doesn't mean that when you write, you're going to write the same thing. Often they're very opposite. And so I find that it's just fascinating for me how, like, why is it that way? But it seems to be with a lot of people who we are isn't always when we pick up the book. Sometimes it's shocking to say, oh, it's that person, because, you never realize that's the type of writing that they wanted to do. So I find that disconnect sometimes really interesting. Joe, you've got speaker status, so maybe if you have a question. Norb, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
I look at it this way. I don't watch a lot of TV, but I'll watch true crime dramas. That doesn't mean I'm a serial killer,
I hope not, Norb. Joe, do you have a question for Norb?
No bodies in the closet.
I have several questions. Norb, how are you?
Hi.
I wonder if you're also protecting the guilty, are you?
That's the next book.
Yeah, well, we'll see about that, right? So I'm quite fascinated. I'm quite fascinated by World by Design, and as you know, it took me months to read it. Right? I read it one poem at a time, and sometimes I read that same poem 3 times, and ended up with an awful lot of questions. So you do change your approach several times. There are different approaches, licenses, styles, whatever you want to call them. And you have some that are like just really highly metaphorical, like Gambler's Eyes. And these 3 lines I read over and over again. We're not family or friends or family friends, but a mismatched hand of aces in the full house of broken diamonds whose meanings are lost in the flush. And I was just, whoa. I don't think I've ever seen anybody try to use the metaphor of cards and gambling and so on so well. I was blown away by that. And then, for example, the poem Juice, to this day, I am not sure if you were talking about a person or a society, or if you were using the person as a metaphor, or vice versa. I just thought this was fascinating, and I still haven't figured it out. And I want to know if you feel like you are aware of doing those crossover things where you're using relationships as metaphors for what's going on in society, or vice versa, or if that's just me. And I want to know. Tell me.
I think there are times where you can certainly get away with using relationship metaphors as society metaphors, because in a way, relationships extend beyond person to person. It's person to thing, it's person to community. It's hard for even me to explain. Most of the time, I either know what I'm doing or I have a really good idea of what I'm doing, but I'll never claim to know exactly what I'm doing at the same time.
Okay, so this brilliance is just spewing forth from your brain.
I guess, if you want to call it that. I don't know.
It's true. It's true, Norb.
Okay, you guys say so.
We have some other people who want to ask questions, so I'm going to just grant their request, and then we can take turns asking you some questions. But while I'm working that magic, have you ever tried to write a short story? Because you mentioned that.
Oh, yes.
Oh, you have? What did that feel like?
I've learned that I'm not as good at it as I am with poetry. There was like I said, on writing.com, there was a competition where you were given a category that you were most likely not to be familiar with, and then you had to write product reviews on different things and a short story based on it, and I was given horror, and I'm not much of a horror consumer, unless it's a Saturday night and it's like a really cheesy, campy movie and I can't sleep. But so I'm aware of the basic tropes, but I don't know what makes something scary or not. I know how to get emotional, but I don't know how to get certain emotions. So I wrote a short story, I posted it on the site. A lot of people liked it. A lot of people criticized like basic things, like I use ellipses far too much, and I know that, but I can't help it. But it was definitely different. It didn't take me as long as I thought it would, but I also didn't put a whole ton of effort into it. It's not something that I feel like I'm geared for. I like the idea of like flash fiction, but I'm too wordy for that. Again, I'm the kind of person that will tell you a story. I will tell you a 5-minute story in person, in conversation, and it'll take me 20 minutes because I'm off on tangents here and there and there. And oh, this person, and oh, that day. Oh, by the way, while we were doing this, So I get distracted easily when it comes to short stories and trying to stick on point and under a certain word count. I don't like limitations. I don't care for form poetry where it's got to be a certain meter and a certain number of syllables and this and that. Like I write words, man. I don't do math, So I like to stick with what I know and what I'm good at, and on the rare occasion, I will step out of my comfort zone, yes, but it's a reason it's a comfort zone, and there's a reason why I'm there,
That could be a tagline for a book. I write words, man. I can picture that in your Amazon blurb. I'd buy that.
I almost spit water all over my screen.
Ivy, do you have a question? Thanks so much for joining us, by the way.
It's nice to be here, Jen. Norb? Hi.
Hi, Ivy.
Okay. See, I just wanted to understand the thought process behind what poets use while writing poetry. So I wanted to ask you, when you wrote this poem, Pocket Annie, do you remember this one?
Yes.
So Pocket Annie has depression, but not the sad kind. She doesn't know what it is, just that it is. So what is this poem about?
It started off actually being about depression, and a lot of times you can have depression and not know it. You just know something is wrong, if that makes sense. And I know I kind of twisted the words up in there. But yeah, I mean, it starts out as depression and realizing or thinking that you're alone, and you're alone, you're isolated. But then you realize you do a little homework, and you check, and you realize you're not as alone maybe as you think you are. And that, everybody gets depressed to different degrees at different times, and they just don't know it. They don't realize it, and they just go through life thinking, I'm fine, I'll get through this. And, most people can do that, but not everybody can.
That's very deep, no, because I read the poem a couple of times trying to understand what it was about, but you've made it clear now. So thank you.
Okay, I'm glad I could do that. Thank you.
So when you write your poems, like for each poem, is there somebody that you think about, someone that inspires you, or someone you've observed, or is there something that you've seen that makes you write? What's your process?
I think a lot of it is based on observation, and if I'm lucky, I do a lot of walking around town. I walk pretty much everywhere I go. So I get to, and I live a street over from like the downtown section. It's a college town, so there's generally a lot going on, and it's a great place to observe and a great place to see people. If I'm lucky enough, I'll have a word or a couple words or a phrase pop in my head at the same time, and I go home and write it down. And if I'm comfortable enough with that, I can flesh it out relatively quickly. Otherwise, I've got to give it time to see if I can build something around it.
That's beautiful.
What was These Locks Are Viral about? Sorry, Jen, did you say something?
No, I was just going to say the whole thing is beautiful, because I could picture what Norb was saying, the whole, you're walking, right? It can be anywhere, but anywhere where there's, people or emotion or imagery, and you're just kind of soaking that up. You might have your notebook with you, but if you don't, it's kind of like pours out once you get home. Go ahead, Ivy.
I think that's the process that you also use a little bit in your writing, right?
I do, yeah,
There's
very
a
much. I
lot
can
of-
relate to that deeply. That whole time travel series was I was camping and hiking, so there's lots of time to ponder and lots of imagery to view. So yeah, I can relate to that process.
No, so I was asking you, these locks are viral. It says, there's a line in it that says, tiny blisters become a country bearing your name, and the world is waging its war. And the truest action it's familiar with, you can't make it go away. It's you. What was this poem about?
I'm glad you recited it because I was trying to find it.
I'll read a little bit more of it. It's called These Locks Are Viral.
Yeah.
Everyone notices your wondrous mistakes. It starts off that way.
Yeah, you got a page number? Oh wait, I got it. Let me see. So, yeah, I think a lot of it is about criticism, actually. Especially people who don't understand the most simple terms I can put this. When you tell somebody you're a writer and they say, "Oh, that's easy, I could write a book." Yeah, well then do it, And you have to write a book to understand how difficult it is to write a book, right? I think we all get that. And then it just sort of it kind of in my head. That's where I started it, and it just kind of spiraled to where it got away from me a little, and the meaning sort of becomes obscured in that we often get in our own heads a lot as writers too, where we question what we're doing, we question why we're doing it, we question a lot of what we're actually doing. We're questioning the words on the page themselves sometimes. And we tend to sort of get in our own heads as much as other people can get in our own heads. And nobody can get in our own heads better than ourselves. We know how to tear ourselves down as far as writing goes, that to deal with condescending comments from people who can barely put two sentences together on a piece of paper, telling you that, oh, they can write a book, it's easy, no problem. That's sort of how it all boiled together. That's a very long explanation for a 7-line poem, and I'm very sorry.
The comment, though, about questioning, at the very beginning when we were chatting, you mentioned mentioned querying. For people listening, I mean, I see a lot of published authors on here. There's some obviously, that are readers of poetry. But what did that feel like? Was that you questioning how to put the poetry out there when you finished that first book? What was the querying decision for you? When did you decide to switch to self-pub? Like, how did that look? And was that you doubting yourself at all in the process, or did you always kind of know what you needed to be happy when it came to publishing?
The first book came together very magically, and it's a very uncommon story. I was friends with a woman on Twitter. She was a mental health advocate, and she had put out books herself. And one day she tweeted, "I'm thinking about starting a publishing company. Anybody interested?" And I responded. I didn't know her well, but I knew her well enough that I felt like I could respond to her. And I said, "Well, if you want to publish poetry, I can sort of do that." But at that point, I had already had 100 done. I just had to put it into a document. And so she was like, "Send me a query letter anyway." So I did, even though she had basically already accepted me. I just had to go through the motion. So it was a very different process than what the majority of people go through. When it came to the second book, it was only supposed to be a chat book. It was only supposed to be about 30 pages long, just poems. And I sent that to her, but there were issues with the publishing where there were like blank pages and stuff like that. And she was like, well, I'll send it back to our formatter and we'll get that fixed up. And in the meanwhile, the company went under. So I was stalled out. I had already been far enough along in the process. And I said, well, I'll publish it myself. So I dug up a bunch of essays I had written on different mental health topics and pulled together some interviews that I had done for the first book and threw all that in to have at least enough for 100 pages. I still had the cover designer, so that was fine. That was great. Threw that together and self-published it. With the third one, it was just, I had researched different indie publications, different publishers, looked to see who was accepting submissions, and I couldn't even tell you who or how many I submitted to before. It did take a while. It took probably at least a year and a half or so of doing that before I said, all right, the hell with this. I'm going to put it out myself.
That's so interesting because it almost sounds like you kind of fell more into self-publishing because of what happened. But then with your third one, you very much sounds like you chose to go that route again. Is it because by that point you kind of understood the whole process and you felt that it was best to just go ahead and do it yourself? Was it because you didn't want to face querying again? What with the third one? Why that decision?
Well, I think I had just gotten tired of querying. With having self-published the second book, I knew a lot of what I was doing at that point. I knew how to get it up to KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing. And yeah, I had just grown tired of querying. I felt like I had reached the point where I don't want to say I gave up, but I was getting tired of it, and that's too bad, but it can be a blessing in disguise because I look and say, hey, I made this decision in part because the decision was kind of made for me by not getting accepted. So I feel like the book itself has been successful. I'm happy with how it turned out. I'm very proud of it. Would I have had the same success going through a publisher? Who knows? I look at it as the main difference being the marketing would have been different. They may have marketed it in a different way than I have been. So that's how I've come to accept the situation.
And I was going to say, you said it, and I was thinking it, how it's been well received, right? So it is successful from that standpoint. And we always wonder if we had this huge publishing contract, would the marketing side be so different? But we read all the time things about how only a certain percentage of those books are chosen to really be the ones that, a traditional publisher pushes or markets hard. And so in some ways, our marketing efforts might be way stronger and maybe even a bit savvier because, we don't have the funds necessarily behind it. So we have to be, make different choices and work really hard. And you've done all that. So that's really cool. Do you have another poem that you want to share or anything about World by Design that you want to mention before we kind of wind down?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and read the first one. It's about the same length, pretty short for my standards, I guess. It's called Unidentified Man. I can't keep a thought in one place in my head. My days are numbered. Truth is, everyone's are, but no one registers that. So who am I to make that bold claim? In all my delicate honesty, one man's X is another man's Y, and one statement isn't the truth so much as it's not a lie. If I dance like nobody's watching, it's because I'm not. You can't keep a thought of me placed in your head unless it's what you want to believe. And maybe I am, or maybe I'm not. And maybe someone believes you, or maybe they don't. What does that mean to me? What am I to believe? Did anyone ask me? Did you think to ask me? Your days are numbered, whether you like it or not.
Again, my same reaction to the other one and the same reaction I had when I did review your book. Each time you read a poem, I feel wow at the end. And there's always these certain phrases and words that jump out at me. And Joe mentioned that too, and Ivy did as well. You just can't get them out of your head. And no wonder Joe had to reread, and Ivy too, poems multiple times, because I did the same when I read your first book. They stick in your head because they can have multiple meanings, but they also mean something to me. So that's awesome. I put in the replies delicate honesty as the description to you, because in some ways you're really bold when you do those rhetorical questions, and that's not delicate at all. So I love a little bit of the ironic twist here. But just as a human being, you're honest but kind. So I think it is true. That's awesome. Are you working on anything now, Norb? Are you still filling that notebook? What does the future hold for us in terms of your work?
I've got a couple works in progress. They're in the very early stages. I think I'm still putting myself into the marketing cycle. That even though this book's just been out for just over a year, I think I put it out right before Christmas last year. I've been more focused on doing what I can to make this book successful. But yeah, there's a couple of notebooks kind of starting to fill up a little bit, but it's going to be a little while before I think I get to the end point with those.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know. I look forward to that. Joe, do you have a final comment or question for Norb? And then I see there's another request there. I'm going to go in and grant that.
I think I feel kind of inspired. I'm trying to write a little bit of poetry. I don't want to make this about me, but just for context. I feel somewhat inspired by Norb because I'm incredibly shy about sharing it. It makes me feel exposed and hollowed out at the same time. And I'm going to try to brave up. And I think I can credit him a bit for starting to feel a little braver about the whole thing. And I really appreciate that, Norb. I love your work. And which one should I read next? Should I read of the other two books? Thanks for this, hon.
Thank you so much, Joe. 100 is out of print right now because of the publisher going under and me not really doing anything to try to save it. I still have the rights to it. I own the cover. I own all that good stuff. I just have to. There's actually a couple of errors in there that I missed upon proofing it that I have to correct. And I thought I did that once, but I must not have saved it, or I saved it in a file that I can't find on my laptop. So I'm going to say go ahead and read Mutants. I think it's there's not a lot of poetry in there, but the poetry that is in there is much better quality. I think the way that I wrote 100.
Norb, you kind of faded out for a sec.
I'm sorry?
You just kind of faded out there for a sec. So the way that you wrote 100?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the way that I wrote 100, it was trying to write 100 poems in 100 days. And I had some setbacks along the way. I had some personal stuff go on. I got to 100 poems, but it was in more than 100 days. And like I said, it was already done by the time I had met my publisher, and I just had to, upload it to a Word doc. So a lot of the poems aren't quite as good, in my opinion, as a lot of the stuff in Mutants and in World by Design. But hey, if you can find a used copy of 100 floating around on Amazon, go for it. But I would suggest Mutants more so because I think it's better, and it's got mental health essays as well as some old blog entries I wrote like 10 or 12 years ago that probably haven't aged quite as well. But that's what I would suggest. And thank you so much for all of your kindness, Joe, and your conversations and chats. I appreciate you so much.
Oh, honey, back at ya. Thanks so much.
I just have to interject and say 100 is amazing, despite Norb's comments. I loved it. It hit me deeply, and I was moved, and I was inspired by what I said, the lyrical quality that felt very musical mixed with this conversation. And I noticed in the poems that Norb that you read today, it resonates in the same way. So maybe, we all grow, and it's interesting how sometimes we're like, oh, that what I wrote 5 years ago or 3 years ago, please don't read that. Now read this. But I loved it. So you have certainly nothing to feel, not that you're ashamed of it, but it's lovely. And if people can find it, it's worth it to read that too. So
thank you. I appreciate that. We're our own worst critics, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned that earlier, like sometimes you're in your own head more than you assume it's other people that are critiquing or thinking certain things, but sometimes it's ourselves. That's such as life. We had a question from, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Osiris. I see your name there, and I granted the request. I'm not sure how your mic's working, but what was your question? I think it was about theme.
Yes, it was. Hello, mic check, making sure. I feel like I always do this with my mic. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, it sounds perfect for me. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you for having me on, Jen, and great to make you all your acquaintance. But Norb, I had a question for you, man. So, like in the creation, well, before I ask the question, I do want to say that I wholeheartedly agree with a comment you made about people who aren't writers or who aren't in this medium, who have a lot to say, but don't necessarily put any sort of pen to paper or any words to the keyboard onto the screen, but have a lot to say in terms of critique. So I'm with you on that. And also with you as well, Jen, about being your own worst enemy. Yeah, there's been many times you just kind of just stay, you're lying dormant in your own mind, hoping that what you are trying to convey is perceived well, when in actuality it likely will be, but just that doubt in your own mind kind of just clouds your own judgment and doesn't allow you to really move forward. But anyway, I just want to say I agree with those things. But Norb, the question I had for you, sir, was when creating poetry, right? Like when you are in the process of writing a book, and I love the process that you do as well. I've tried writing poetry off of paper and transcribing it. It is tricky. So like my hat's off to you. I salute you on that. But when creating the poem or the poetry book, how do you convey or create the overall message of the book? And then in that aspect, how do you target an audience for that? Because as you know, your poetry is so widespread that it's kind of tricky to like navigate the marketing aspect of that book when it comes to a certain topic. So yeah, how do you create the message of the book? And then from there, how do you find the audience for that message? Thank you.
I appreciate your question, Osiris. I think that's a great question. I'm going to answer it in two parts. The theme itself, I don't go into a brand new, fresh notebook with a theme in mind. But usually within the first, I'd say 10 to 12, maybe 20 poems, you start to get a sense that there's a commonality to them. There's a common, maybe not necessarily a theme, but there's a way that these all work together in a certain way. So that must be an indication of where my head's at that time in my life. So I just kind of ride it from there on out. Now, part two, as far as the marketing of it, poetry itself is tricky. You can't necessarily market poetry the same way that you can a romance novel or crime novel or fiction or nonfiction. In part because poetry doesn't necessarily get the same, I don't want to call it respect, because a lot of people love and respect poetry. Honestly, my marketing is just throw it at the wall and see what sticks. I just, I do the basics. I do the Amazon post. I do Facebook posts. I have an author page on Facebook. Obviously, X with the writing community, they're tremendous. I don't know where I would be without their support. I mean, you look at the people that are in this room now that are in this conversation, and a lot of them have all been great supporters. We support each other, which makes a big difference. I only have about 6,000 followers or so. Some people have 10,000, 3,000, 30,000. We all lean on each other. We all have different preferences and different things that we like and don't like. But you're friends with this person and they like this book. Well, maybe I'm going to check it out because they read it and they gave it a great review. I think it's important that we not only share links to our books, but we share reviews also to other people's books. That's a thing that when I see somebody sharing a review, hell yeah, I'm going to share it, because it may not necessarily be a book I like, but maybe my friend likes it, and they'll see that review and go, hey, I'm going to check that book out. So, we all work together. We're all in this together. We all have the same goals. As far as marketing, there are little things you can do differently that might make your book stand out. But in the end, a lot of it's the same. It's the actual doing of it. It's sharing it on Twitter, sharing it on Blue Sky or Instagram or Facebook or, your social media of choice. I did a book signing event that was amazing as far as just the people turning out. It was in a local indie bookstore in my mom's neighborhood that she goes to. I had never heard of until she brought me there once. And they said it was one of their most popular signings. I was like, holy geez, wow, that's incredible. You just, it's not necessarily always how you do it. It's just that you do it. I hope that answers your question, Osiris. I thank you for asking. I thank you for listening.
Yes, sir. No, that answered it greatly. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, who's next?
Does anyone have a final question before we close today?
I do. And I think it fits and it's going to resonate with everything you guys were talking about. Norb, will you write a book called I Write Words Man? And will you make the t-shirt and the coffee mugs?
Man, I write words. I'll jot it down. I'll keep it in mind. I do have some merch in my store, on my website, norbaikin.com/blog/shop or something, that you can get signed books from. I still have some T-shirts from my first book. My publisher thought it was a great idea to do merch to tie in with the book. So we created a hashtag and printed up buttons and bracelets and all sorts of fun stuff. But a lot of that stuff's sitting in the bottom of the closet right now. So I don't know if I'll get back into merch. But I do love the idea of a T-shirt that says "I write books, man." If I could get like some stoner actor person to say that in a movie, I would be floored. I write books, man.
Oh, who is it? It's the guy from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Who's that actor?
Sean Penn. I don't have.
That's who you need, man.
This is perfect. I'd buy that merch. All right. Anyone with a final question for Norb?
Yeah, come on. This is good. Come on.
I think we've been very thorough, so I'm not sure if there are any final ones, but please, if you do have one, we're going to wrap up in a couple minutes, so please feel free to share.
Yeah, I don't have a question, but I wanted to read a few lines from this poem written by Norb. It says, "Leave it better than how you found it."
Yes, go ahead.
Norb, do you remember this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
This ain't our world. It was given to us by people who had ideas for it. When it was given to them, we've all graced that mental chalkboard with our own thoughts of how it's going to end up, and determinedly made something from what we found we were given. Some thoughts better than others, and some walked into more elaborate situations than most could imagine. So I really like the idea of this poem, that you leave it better than you found it, leave the world better than you found it. So I thought, as you're concluding, this was a good thought to leave everybody with.
Hey, that is a great observation and a great sentiment, and I appreciate it, Ivy, so much. Leave it better than how you found it was something, this will shock a lot of you. I was a Boy Scout when I was a kid, so I was a good little kid. And we would go on camping trips, and we were always told to leave the campsite better than you found it. So, and I think that's a very good concept for the world itself and our place in it. Doing a small gesture of kindness each day, whether it's something so simple, even just to yourself, to take care of yourself, to help somebody out when you see they need help if you can. I'm not saying go out and make yourself poor just to make somebody else rich, but any small act of kindness you can do to brighten somebody else's day, that's you leaving the world better than you found it.
What I really love with everything that you've said today, Norb, there was a point where you were saying world by design, that whole questioning of, do we design our lives? Do we design our world, or is it already designed and we're just kind of, going through something that's been created for us? You kind of just throughout all of your answers did answer that for us in a way. Leaving the world better than you found it sure sounds like we can be empowered to act and, make certain choices. So I love that. That's a very positive outlook. And I've had this conversation, I think, on the Cozy Book Nook and in with others as well, with Lily, for example, just about how just because a poem has anguish or sadness, or, you might have felt depressed or sad when you wrote it, it doesn't mean that that's how, what you want the final outlook of the world to be, right? You just process it and go through it. But I feel like ultimately your poetry leaves us feeling empowered and inspired. It certainly does that for me. I find it beautiful, and I just really appreciate the time you took today to share so much with us. And yeah, it's amazing. Please support Norb's work if anybody's listening here today and is able to. I've left links, and yeah, that would be appreciated. Any final comments, Norb?
I appreciate you all for listening, for being here. For many of you, you're a part of my daily existence, and I'm beyond proud to support all of you. I'm thankful for you all. Jen, thank you for having me, for taking time out of your busy weekend to do this. It's been a great experience. I always enjoy talking to people, even though I don't always know what to say or how to say it. I enjoy talking to people, especially about books, and everything's a learning experience. So thank you all so much. I'm so appreciative. Thank you. I don't know what else to say.
It's wonderful. I'm going to edit the video, and I will share the MP4 on my website, YouTube. I'll get it on X too. I'll give Norb a copy, and we can share this just to kind of give back. So have an awesome rest of your weekend, everyone. Thanks, Norb.
Thank you.